Shut the doors, shut the doors. The doors. They're still coming in, which is good. I want to welcome all of you here tonight. My name is Steve Wenzel. I'm the Executive Director of the Gordon Rosenmeier Center for State and Local Government. I never tire of telling the good people of this area that we remember the legacy of Gordon Rosenmeier and for what he did for the state of Minnesota and for the cause of good government. Gordon Rosenmeier was, without question, the single most powerful and influential and the most respected legislator in all of Minnesota history. No bill could pass in the Minnesota legislature without his approval. And but what he did for the people of Minnesota was tremendous. Just briefly, he was the creator of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in 1967. We were the first state in the nation to have a pollution control agency, thanks to the vision and leadership of Gordon Rosenmeier. It's interesting that when President Nixon, adopted the Clean Water, the National Environmental Board, he adopted the legislation created by Gordon Rosenmeier. So the National Agency on Environmental Control and Anti-Pollution Control is based on the law chief authored by Gordon Rosenmeier. Gordon Rosenmeier also was the chief author of the Community College Organizational Bill in 1962, which set up the Minnesota community colleges the way they are still today. Before that, they were independent and on their own and under school districts at that time. Interestingly, Gordon's father, Christian Rosenmeier, was state senator for Crow Wing and Morrison counties 20 years before his son, and he was the chief author of the law that created Brainerd Junior College in 1938. Tonight it is my honor to introduce to you the Chief Executive Officer of Minnesota Power, Tim Thompson. Mr. Thompson has been the CEO of Crow Wing Power. Did I say Minnesota Power? Crow Wing Power for the past year, but he is no stranger to the interest of electric cooperatives. He, for 17 years, was the CEO of the Lake Region Electrical Co-op in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. He holds an MBA from Jacksonville State University in Alabama and a bachelor's degree in finance from Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Throughout his career, Tim has championed innovation, financial strength, and member-focused energy solutions, including community solar, distributive energy programs, and new subsidiary ventures. A second-generation cooperative leader, Tim's passion for the co-op mission began early in his life and continues to guide his commitment to the reliability, community engagement, and the increasing value for its members. His father was involved in cooperatives, and he tells me his daughter is also involved in cooperatives in Austin or Albert Lea, Minnesota. With no further ado, it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you Tim Thompson, the CEO of Crow Wing Power. Thank you.
All right. Some slides? Uh-oh. Power outage. Oh. No slides? Okay. Well, There we go. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Steve. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight for this Nuclear Energy Forum. For those of you that I didn't get a chance to meet, my name is Tim Thompson, the President and CEO of I'm doing it now, Crow Wing Power. Sorry about that. I am just delighted to be here, to be part of this Nuclear Energy Forum, and grateful for the opportunity to meet so many community members here tonight. So let me ask you a question. Why is nuclear energy and the lifting of the moratorium on new nuclear power such an important topic in our state and to Crow Wing Power? Well, the short answer is, as the demand for electricity continues to increase, we need to make sure the supply of electricity keeps pace, including the opportunity to have new nuclear power that is a reliable 24/7 source of electricity, and nuclear power is a carbon-free source of electricity, which will help utilities achieve the Minnesota 100% carbon-free electricity requirement by the year 2040. At Crow Wing Power, our locally elected board of directors, who recently adopted a board resolution supporting the lifting of the moratorium, and the 96 hardworking employees have the responsibility of providing safe and reliable power to over 48,000 electric consumers throughout the Brainerd Lakes area, as shown on this map. In order to serve this service territory, we own, operate, and maintain 28 electrical substations and over 5,600 miles of power line. So we are the local electric distribution company that distributes the electricity from the local substation out to the homes and businesses throughout our service area. We do not generate the electricity. We buy our electricity from Basin Electric Cooperative, who owns and operates the power plants, and the electricity is transmitted over the bulk transmission system down to our local substations at the local level. This slide shows where power comes from and how Basin's generation portfolio has grown and is changing. If we go back to the year 2000, Basin generated about 2,800 megawatts of electricity, and 84% of that electricity came from coal-fired power plants. Fast forward to the year 2023, Basin generated 8,100 megawatts of electricity, with 35% coming from coal, 15% natural gas, and 26% from wind. As we look to the future, by the year 2030, Basin's generation portfolio will produce over 10,000 megawatts of electricity, with 27% from coal, 34% from natural gas, 23% from wind, and about 4% from solar. The demand for electricity is going to continue to increase, and our generation portfolio needs to continue to grow and evolve. At Crow Wing Power, not only do we power the community with electricity, we also support the community beyond the power. Crow Wing Power has now paid back over $57 million to local member owners of the cooperative in capital credits. In the cooperative business model, capital credits are the margins or profits from the co-op that are paid back directly to the local member owners of the co-op. Our Operation Roundup program has now paid out over $5.1 million in grants to local nonprofit organizations to improve the quality of life for the people within our service territory. We support Central Lakes College and the students, some here tonight, by providing scholarships and participating in Career Day with the students. We've granted funds to the Central Lakes College Food Pantry and to the law enforcement programs here at the college. Our employees, a few here tonight, participate in things like bag stuffing events, gifting food and items to area nonprofits for people in need. We are the local electric cooperative ready and willing to serve our community beyond the power. At Crow Wing Power, we believe we can build a reliable energy future that works for Minnesota. We want to be a leader in helping bring industry experts and meaningful conversation to our community to talk about important energy issues like nuclear power here this evening. Your interest and your engagement on energy-related issues is essential to shaping and informing decisions. What better way to build a reliable energy future is to have community forums like the one we are having tonight for the people. Thank you for being engaged, and I look forward to tonight's conversation.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Meyer. I'm the president of the Gordon Rosenmeier Board of State and Local Government here at Central Lakes College, and thank you for attending. We have some great speakers here this evening, and I'd like to introduce them to you. One of those speakers is Derek Moe, President and CEO of Minnesota Rural Electric Association. Derek started his service as President and CEO of Minnesota Rural Electric Association in 2024. It's a statewide association that serves and provides safety and support, education, training, communication, and support to all cooperatives in Minnesota. He's a graduate of the University of Minnesota, California State University, University of Idaho, master's degree in humanities, electrical engineering, and emphasis on system operations. He has worked in electric utility industry for over 35 years, holding positions including Washington Liaison, Operations Support Manager in bulk transmissions, Regional Manager in Western Area Power Administration in Southwest Region, responsible for over 3,000 miles of transmission lines, marketing power from the Hoover Dam and other federal generation facilities in the Southwest. He has served on national and regional power system operation reliability committees. Thank you very much for being here this evening, Derek. The other presenter we have this evening on our board is going to be Michael Brazel. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Deep Fusion. Michael has served as Chief Operating Officer of Deep Fusion since October 2025. Before joining Deep Fusion, Mr. Brazel worked at NewScale Power in successive roles from 2012 to 2014, and recently as a Senior Director. He also served at Dairyland Power Cooperative from February 2002 to March 2012 as a plant manager, La Crosse Boiling Water Reactor from 2009 to 2012, completed Naval Nuclear Power School, and holds engineering and business degrees from Old Dominion University and University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. He currently serves on the board of directors for Lake Region Electric Cooperative and the Great River Energy in Minnesota. Thank you very much for being here this evening, Michael. The other thing we have here, other individual we have here this evening is a Philip Halt, Development Manager, Nuclear Engineer. Philip Halt is a promoter of the dual roles of expanding access to energy and reducing the impacts of climate change. He currently works to promote nuclear power through public engagement and addressing equity challenges surrounding long-term deposition of spent nuclear fuels. He served with Generation Atomics. He works for organized advocacies, building coalition across social and political divides. He serves as the development director for Generation Atomic. He also holds a master's degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Cambridge, UK. Thank you very much for being here this evening, Philip. And we also have our fourth guest here, which is Greg Blaine. He's the secretary of the Gordon Rosenmeier Center for State and Local Government. Greg served on the Rosenmeier board since 2012. He has extensive experience in local government. He served on the House of Representatives from 2001 to 2006. He currently serves as the Morrison County Commissioner since 2018. He's currently serving his 12th year on the Stearns Electric Cooperative Board of Directors. In addition, he has also served as a board of director for Great River Energy. He holds a treasurer seats on Region 5 Development Commission and Rural Morrison County Development Finance Authority. Thank you very much for being here this evening, Mr. Blaine. Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone, and once again, I'll say thank you to all of you for being here, and we'd certainly hope that everyone will enjoy a more casual conversation about a very important topic at this point in time. And so, without me sitting here talking about this, I'm going to kick this off, and let's get started and talk about nuclear energy. And so I'm going to look to Philip and ask, can you give us a fundamental explanation to help all of us understand, really what is nuclear energy?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me and for all being here. Unfortunately, we're sitting and asking me to be fundamental, so I will try, as we discussed, that to be brief. But I guess the way we start is that Einstein told us energy is never created, it is only transformed. And we see that in our world. As we know, this world is made of stuff. Stuff is made of molecules, and molecules are made of atoms. And when we extract energy from different types of fuel to create electricity, we do it by breaking the bonds of things to create energy. When we burn oil, gas, or coal, we're breaking the molecules apart. When we use nuclear fission or fusion, we're taking the power from the protons and neutrons that are in the atom. And so that's really the only difference. Some other energy sources. I've heard described at the elementary school level that you have magic rocks with a minuscule cauldron, and you configure it just right and say the right words and put the right special ingredients in. And those rocks get hot and they glow and they create steam, turns a turbine, and makes electricity for us. And I think that that's sufficient to understand where we are, with the caveat that cauldron in that machine is very specific, and there's lots of different ways to do it. So I think that's a little further than details we can get, but it creeps up from the engineering standpoint that what the rocks are like and what the metal is like in different things.
So thank you, Philip, and for everyone, we're really blessed to have three individuals here with me, on stage that have extensive knowledge in this topic, but also the great ability to be able to communicate that to the public and to all of you. And later on this evening, we're going to give that opportunity for all of you to ask those questions that maybe we don't cover as we go along here this evening. So to Philip and Michael, I think it's important that we look at, so where is our nuclear industry today in Minnesota? What is the status of the nuclear industry as we see it right now?
In Minnesota?
In Minnesota.
In Minnesota, well, Minnesota has 3 nuclear power plants, one at Monticello. Xcel Energy owns all 3 of them. And then 2 at Prairie Island down by Red Wing, Minnesota.
Right, yeah.
That's only 3 right now, and of course there's a moratorium, as we all know, and something that we're working on to be able to be another energy source for us here in Minnesota.
When we don't hear a lot of dialogue, I guess you would say, these days about our nuclear energy plants. I mean, they're there, they're running. You know, for many of us, if we're traversing from central Minnesota to let's say the Twin Cities area, we can look across from I-94 or from Highway 10, and we notice the Monticello plant, and we know that's there, but it's not. This isn't something that becomes newsworthy on a daily, monthly, or even yearly basis. These plants are there, they're operating, and big reason we have lights on now and when there's adverse weather. One of the other perspectives that's probably taken more of the limelight has been the installation of solar and wind across the state. And so I look to you both to share with us, you know, how does nuclear fit in that world with wind and with solar? And then I'll also ask you to maybe look at how would nuclear fit into that energy portfolio with gas or coal or natural gas also. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I can be short on this one. Very well. I'll let these gentlemen fill in the details.
Derek.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, that's a really critical question in terms of thinking about what's going to be available for energy sources today and into the future. We just talked a little bit about what plants are on the ground here in Minnesota. They've been there since about the mid-'70s, and they are providing today a little less than half, almost half of the carbon-free generation that's produced on the grid as we speak, and in recent years and in the near future. So they're a vital source of electricity in general, and they're certainly critical to what's available to keep our lights on and still be carbon-free. And so wind and solar is kind of where you started the question.
Yep.
Greg, those are the other kind of primary sources of energy that are also available that don't produce carbon. What's the distinction is, and Tim, the CEO of 3M, is it, I think, alluded to this in his opening remarks. It's this generation source that both is available all the time, not weather dependent, doesn't matter what time of day, and that doesn't produce any carbon. So it's responsive to society's climate goals, and it's really an intersection of one energy source, essentially. Now, there are other things that, of course, we could talk about that are more research and development, that are maybe down the road, could also be possibilities to augment that scheme. But essentially, if you want to talk about producing electricity without carbon in bulk for everybody's needs, and you want to have a resource that's there under all weather conditions, nuclear is really the only answer to that. So it's a critical part of our energy mix. And while it's produced, 40 to 50% of our carbon-free energy today, our energy needs also continue to grow into the future, and those plants continue to get older. So having nuclear energy available as a resource, as an alternative into the future in the state, becomes more and more important as time goes on.
Certainly.
Greg, let me add something to that. Expanding on what Derek is saying is, if you look at nuclear, we in the industry, power industry, we use something called capacity factor quite a bit. And nuclear generally runs in about that low 90% capacity factor. What that means is it's running 90% of the time. You take and that's an industry average across all 90-some reactors across the U.S. They're running 90% of the time. That's including outages for refueling. If there's something that shut them down. Whereas wind is 30%, maybe 30 to, maybe 40 if you're lucky. You got a windy winter or something like that. Solar's less than that. Coal's in the 60%, 70% range in terms of capacity factor. So it's really undeniably one of the most reliable energy sources out there.
It's fantastic. So when we've already mentioned the state mandate and we've mentioned the moratorium. We'll dive a little deeper into that as we go along here, but do we really need nuclear energy to meet that 2040 mandate?
So I think we have two parts to that question. One is, do we need the nuclear we have? Absolutely. There's no way of getting close. Do we need more additional nuclear between then and now? It could theoretically be possible to do it without that. I think would be really stretching the very edges of what might be possible. So as sometime academic, occasionally I refuse to say never happen if it is a tiny possibility. But if we look at what is going to be the most cost-effective, stable, reliable system by 2040 that is also carbon-free, such a system would include more nuclear.
So so thank you, and that helps to, bring that picture more into focus, especially for those leaders that are with us tonight, whether here or streaming this live with us too. There is that concern about can we meet that mandate? We set this goal. State government has set this goal, and is basically underlined, saying this is where we have to be. But there are concerns at this point in time. Can we actually make that happen? And Derek, your thoughts?
Yeah, Greg, I think another thing that's baked into and important to the question that you're asking is the timeline, which, the standard for carbon-free is by 2040. That is tomorrow in the electric utility industry.
Yes.
That's a timeline that, even if there was no moratorium in the state, it'd be a very big stretch goal to decide you're going to build, site, all of this to a plant. In fact, even to build stuff that's a lot simpler to build, 2040 is not very far away in the industry. So I think, it needs to be part of the resource mix that's available as soon as possible in order to continue to meet those challenges. And as you get further out into time, whether 2040 happens to be the metric for the carbon-free bill, but the load's going to continue to grow. We see forecasts now, again in recent history, about pretty significant increased uses of electricity for a whole variety of reasons. And either, in order to meet those societal challenges, 2040 or not, either you're going to need to have nuclear as part of that resource mix, or you're going to need to see some big breakthrough that certainly I can't predict, that I don't think people in the industry, there's really no consensus around any other sort. Again, there's a lot of ideas about things where there could be breakthroughs, and I'm certainly not saying it's inconceivable we have a breakthrough. It'd be great if we do. But any other source to continue to meet those energy needs and do that in a way that respects carbon concerns, again, even if there wasn't a mandate, to do that in a way that's going to reduce carbon and meet those needs. There just really isn't any other alternative available, because you cannot get there by saying we're only going to build wind and solar and then maybe supplement that with some batteries. That's not a practical way to meet electricity needs well into the future.
So we've already kind of self-transitioned this into looking at, why we would look at nuclear now. Why should we talk about this technology now? And I think one of the exciting things that's happening in the nuclear industry is the utilization of advances in technology. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are often mentioned as the future in nuclear energy. I'm going to ask both Mike and Phil to share with us what are SMRs. Help us to understand that, and I think they may even share with us maybe that they should be called something else, maybe, or give us some greater insight into that. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would start by saying that SMRs, I think, has been developed in the zeitgeist as a term to be not your grandfather's nuclear, right? So we use it as a term to discuss things that are maybe they have different attributes that we like. They're cleaner, or they have less waste, or they're going to be faster to build, or cheaper to build, or use different technologies. And all these things, can be true. But the technical term, the small modular reactor, is kind of a cutoff of an arbitrary amount of 300 megawatts, which doesn't really mean anything and really doesn't describe these attributes that people want to give it. I think what's key is to say that when I was talking earlier about how you've got the kettle and you got to put the ingredients in, and there are different ways of making a nuclear reactor. In this country, back in the 60s, we experimented with all sorts of different types of reactors, different types of fuels, different types of machines that would use that nuclear force to make energy differently. But the markets at the time moved us into a position, because of economic pressures and siting pressures and regulatory pressures, that we evolved an idea of one type of reactor of one size was the best for the growing electrical demands of the 1970s. And we got good at building those, and that's all we've built since then. Our electrical needs now have changed. We have a more diverse set of generation. We have wind and solar. We have different types of peaking. We have different environmental concerns about carbon or about placement of things. And so the idea to go back and look at some of these ideas from the 1960s that were pushed out of the market and re-examine them as possibilities, I think is really where I see the excitement in these so-called SMRs.
Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm obviously in the business. My company, Deep Fission, is developing a small modular reactor in the grander sense of it. But we're developing what's called a light water reactor technology. It's a pressurized water reactor, which about 60 plus of the current reactors out there that are large light water reactors. Only ours is quite a bit smaller. And as Philip was alluding to, there's high temperature gas cooled, there's sodium, there's molten salt reactors. There's a number of reactors out there that are being developed, and I think it's great that they're taking the technology from that had been looked at back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that maybe didn't work at the time, but with technology and developments, new materials, a lot of these operate at very high temperatures. We're talking 700, 800, 900 degrees, and those new materials need to be developed for that. What I like going back to just the term small modular reactors, what I like about it is what you're talking about is a smaller core. You have multiple reactors feeding multiple turbine generators. So from a reliability standpoint, you don't have that single shaft risk. Where a large reactor, an AP1000 Westinghouse reactor that was just built in Georgia, Vogtle, is 1,100 megawatts, all on one turbine generator, one reactor. And I'll just use an example, and I'm not the only company, Deep Fission isn't the only company, but there's others that are developing anywhere from 5 megawatt all the way up to 300 megawatts small modular reactors, that they're putting multiple reactors together. Well, if you had a circuit board go out and have to shut down one reactor, you've got, for my case, 50 others that are running, and you keep that reactor running. So, and you just have such a smaller source term that you're dealing with per reactor. There's just a number of reasons why that might be advantageous to a utility from a reliability standpoint. So I can go on and on about these things, but there's I will agree. We can get into the large reactor side of things too. There's places for large reactors and there's places for small modular reactors as well.
So our you know, a lot of people look at SMRs as like this is the new cutting wave technology, new and shiny and fancy in the nuclear industry. But are there small reactors that are already being deployed?
Yeah, we've deployed small reactors all over the place. We've got about 100 of them under the ocean running our ships and submarines.
Okay.
Those are small. They're modular. They're made in a factory and brought to the ship. They're in the United States. I don't think we have any commercially operating what would be small modular or smaller reactors. But we do have, again, in this sense, if you take this, what we're really talking about, and I guess I didn't get a chance to give my preferred term, so maybe I'll do that. My preferred term would be advanced nuclear. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, because that's actually a term that's defined by the DOE and the IRS. And it says reactors that show improvement over the existing fleet in one of the following areas. Life efficiency, and it goes through a list. And so you can have large advanced nuclear reactors. The reactors we just built in Vogtle are quite advanced, you know. They're very, very different than the ones that were designed literally on slide rules. They used computers to design these new reactors, which is pretty neat. So do we have existing running SMRs in this country? No. Do we have new advanced reactors that have just come online in Georgia? Yes. Will every reactor we ever build be more advanced than the ones we've always built? Yes. No one is going to start building a Ford Edsel tomorrow, right? So I think that's how I would frame that.
Yeah, and I'd add, China and Russia have small modular reactors up and running, you know, smaller type. Just you know, there's icebreakers that Russia has. They've actually deployed one to Siberia here recently. Mm-hmm. China's got their first SMR up and running, an advanced reactor, I guess, that's your term. And then I'll add, these aren't commercial reactors, but Department of Energy and universities have multiple test reactors that you could call are small, but they don't produce any electricity or anything like that. So it's all around you. I mean, they're all over. You don't think about it, but I mean, I've been working in Kansas, and Kansas State has one as an example. So they're you wouldn't think of it. They don't advertise it, but they're really out there.
So I'll kind of gloss over a question I was going to ask earlier that I'd planned to ask earlier about, you know, is big better than small? Is small better than big? And it's really what you're explaining to us is size will be dictated by the need and by that advancement in technology out there. And this shouldn't necessarily be a discussion about big versus small. No. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say.
It's a grid issue, really. What's the grid need, right? I mean, there's a place for large reactors in, say, highly populated areas or where there's a lot of load, right?
Yep.
And maybe there's small modular reactors in other places, and maybe it can help avoid building some of the transmission that we're building, which, you know, are billion-dollar projects as well. So,
you know, it occurred to me, I have to mention, you asked, are there any operating now? But I should point out here in Minnesota, Elk River used to have a nuclear reactor. It was a 20 megawatt small modular reactor. Again, emphasizing the idea that this small modular is not new, and that, so I thought I'd throw that trivia out there. We've had small modular reactors running in Minnesota. So
is it fair to say that the amount of spent fuel that you would have from a smaller size reactor would be relative in comparison to a large reactor? Is the amount of waste with the newer technology, would it be less? Is it conceivable that we could have less waste? Because that always seems to be a concern of the public. What do we do? How much waste, and what do we do with it?
This is a question where units matter. So we talk about volume versus weight versus tons. I mean, I can take, one drop of radioactive material, put it in a swimming pool, and the whole swimming pool is now radioactive. It's technically, much, much radioactive per volume. So going back to the fundamentals on when we do this magic rocks and we create the energy from them, the amount of radioactivity that is created is directly proportional to the number of kilowatt hours that are produced. So you can produce a waste product that is more dense and so more radioactive per unit volume, or heavier, or things like this. You can move those numbers. But the way the process of fissioning works is that the amount of radioactivity, or these fission products that we create, is directly proportional to the amount of energy that you create.
And I think that's important for us all to remember. There is a relation.
There's a lot of people that play games with these units. That's what I want to say.
So with the advances in technology, do we also see, those same advances in safety and regulations, in that addressing how this could or would affect the public? Do we still see that at the same level of advancement that we see in the level of advancement in technology in changing this industry?
Well, they probably both have good things to say, but I feel like I haven't talked in a while.
So I'm going to let you jump in.
I came all this way to see you.
Right. I mean, so I just want to mention on the spent fuel, and maybe, I apologize if you're going to come back.
No, that's fine.
Certainly one of the big challenges in the industry, for sure. But I've heard Philip talk about it as in terms of more of a choice challenge than it is a technical challenge, and maybe he'll say a little more about unpacking that now. But every fuel, it's kind of like when I talked a while ago. It seems like forever ago that I talked, but I talked a while ago about you have to have electricity supply, and you have to have nuclear really available as a tool in order for that to work in the future, because we're not in a world where you can just do nothing, So again, the spent fuel should be looked at in a context of any way you're going to get energy, electricity produced, you're going to have a problem with what do you do with the fuel when it's done. There are no energy sources that don't have any spent fuel problems. And one of the upsides to the spent fuel challenge in the nuclear industry is the relative volume, that you could take all of the spent fuel in the industry ever created in the U.S. since 1950 when we started, put it in U.S. Bank Stadium, 10 yards high, and it would all fit in one football stadium in terms of a footprint. So there's big challenges for sure that we have to figure out what our preferred answer is, but there are some ways that, that spent fuel in this industry, has its, there are bigger challenges in other fuel sources probably as well. But the other regulations, so I'll kick that one off and then hope that they could add a lot more. But again, the regulatory side is a huge piece of the industry challenge in general, for sure, and that's kind of baked into the question. But in order to adapt to all of these new technologies that we've talked about a little bit, you have to have policies at the federal level, especially to some degree the federal and the state level, that define what's going to be the safe operating practices, the safe building and construction practices with these various technologies. And it's pretty early days in figuring all of that out on the regulatory side. So there's been some work done, there's been some progress on that, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that in order to make sure that we can get those policies in place and operate under them effectively in order to make the industry, where it needs to be, say 10, 15 years from now. So so that's not an answer, but it did give me a chance to talk a little.
So Derek, you just opened up that idea of looking 15 years from now, 15 years from now is 2040. And so I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more now. Share with all of us here, and for those who don't necessarily understand or realize what that state law that was passed just a couple of years ago that's known as the Minnesota Carbon-Free Standard, and just give us a quick synopsis on that.
Yeah, in 2023, the state legislature passed what was at the time probably the third most aggressive carbon-free standard in the country, based on most metrics. And in a nutshell, it's pretty simple to summarize it. In all electricity going to load in the state of Minnesota by the year 2040 has to be demonstrated to be produced without carbon, has to be carbon-free. So it's actually.
Asterisk.
Yeah, with a whole bunch of what does that really mean with asterisks? Yeah. Do you want to offer some, Phil?
No, sure.
Okay.
I'll throw it in there. So I look at the Clean 2040 Act. Really, what did it change? We already had a renewable portfolio standard that was set to be 100% by 2040. I'm sorry, that had set points of, I think it was 40%, 60%, some threshold that was already set in the future for what we wanted to do just using wind, solar, and water. And they changed that threshold up to 100% and included zero carbon. And what's important to know when you look at the numbers is that the only practical difference between our renewable portfolio standard and our zero carbon standard is nuclear. It opens the door, as you said, for technologies that may come to pass, that may exist, that maybe we'll find, because it defines these things as things that don't emit carbon. But between the technologies we have available to us, the only difference between our previous renewable standard and our zero carbon standard is nuclear. And they don't say it, but I think it's important to recognize, as the legislature did when they passed this law, that was the only difference.
So we can all agree, we can all sit here and agree 100%, nuclear is 100% carbon-free resource. So.
Well, the scientist, academic.
Okay, Phil.
Low carbon. There is a carbon footprint with everything we do, right? Solar and wind, you have to mine materials, you have to drive the trucks there to put in the stuff, you have to put cement in the ground, cement has embedded carbon. So all of these energy technologies have a carbon associated with them. Nuclear is when you include all of the mining, construction, operating, and even disposal of the spent fuel. All together, it has a similar carbon footprint to wind and solar, if not lower. So I have to do the technical. I can't let you get away with.
You can tell he's an engineer, huh?
I know.
Yep.
But you know what? Sometimes those 1% count.
So Derek, is now the time for state government to really reconsider that nuclear moratorium?
Yeah, and that's why we're working on it at the legislature. We have a big coalition of folks that see that as a priority, and it's gained a lot of momentum in the legislature. Generation Atomic's been working on that goal for a lot of years as part of that coalition. I think, as Phil just described, by saying carbon-free instead of saying renewable, in practice, the one thing they did is add nuclear to the mix of things you can use, but there's a separate law that says you can't build new nuclear. So it's good that Xcel's existing plants can get included in how you count whether you've achieved that or not. But again, as our requirements for electricity continue to grow and so on, it's really not an appropriate policy to continue to have both this requirement that we sort of aggressively reduce carbon and at the same time say that you can't have nuclear energy as part of that policy. And I'll maybe just expand a little bit on a statement I made earlier about, because I do think it's really key to, again, the reason we are involved in this at MREA, and a lot of folks are, that the sentiment that we're going to build the electricity grid solely on wind and solar is a pretty widespread sentiment among a pretty big cross-section of folks. And, you know, most people, when they contemplate the fact that what the nature of those resources are, you know, can see that that has some really big challenges. So, but another key to understanding that is, if you're not, and you know, the industry gets complex quickly, unfortunately, but one really key thing to understanding how all of this works is that with electricity, it moves at the speed of light, and it must be produced at exactly the same time it's used. So it's not a water system where we store stuff and, you know, you have to keep it in balance all the time, real time. So the one time in the year when you're using the most of it, you have to be producing that same amount or the lights go out. Because that's the way the physics of the big power grid works, and we're interconnected into huge nationwide power grids, so we impact each other across vast distances. And so once you try to grapple with that and you think, well, solar, we could build as much of it as you want, but is it going to be effective at night? You know, probably not. And wind, again, we build a lot more transmission, we have a lot more wind resources across vast areas, but it's simply true that the wind isn't always blowing. In fact, when you see those peak times a year, it's maybe less likely that the wind is blowing. So then, people that say we could solve this problem with wind and solar will say we'll just add some batteries to that, because then this thing that I said about all at the same time isn't true anymore if you have batteries. But the problem is simply scale. Batteries do exist. They're another thing that I think is going to continue to transform the industry. But the idea that you could take today's technology and produce enough batteries to make this all balance out at all hours is just infeasible. It's not practical from an economic standpoint. It's not close to practical. Yeah. And so you really need a resource that really only nuclear achieves of being there all the time.
And so we're seeing these same challenges that we're facing here in Minnesota being faced in other states across the country and other countries across the world. Can you share with us, you know, some of the changes that other states are taking? I thought I recall state of Illinois lifting their moratorium, taking the action to lift their moratorium. Other things that you may want to share with us.
Mike? Yeah, well, the American Nuclear Society just put out an article on this. I sent it to a couple of you guys. Yeah, I mean, Illinois, Indiana, West Virginia, I mean, I could keep going on and on, have all overturned their moratoriums recently. Some are even promoting it. Texas in particular started a Texas Nuclear Alliance. That is, I went to the summit here in October, was it? No, when was that? It was last fall. And we had 600 people there, you know, talking about nuclear in Texas, right? And they're openly promoting it. They've got a state regulatory agency that's there, and they've set up a fund to help get companies off the ground with nuclear. So, because they see that, you know, all the wind they have and all the gas they have, but in order to move forward, they need nuclear. And they have a couple nuclear plants. So more states just recently announced, I think North Dakota is doing a study on it. Wisconsin just announced this last week, where they're doing some siting, actually. The Public Service Commission, along with the University of Wisconsin Nuclear Engineering Department, are doing siting studies to see where are the best locations to put nuclear plants in Wisconsin. So there's a lot of work going on throughout the country. And you would think, California might be one of those that isn't looking at it. No, there's a big push out there. They kept Rancho Seco, not Rancho Seco, that's an older plant. Diablo Canyon. They kept Diablo Canyon, was scheduled to shut down, and the state legislature authorized it to run for another 5 years, and now they're extending that as well. And they're looking into new nuclear. So there's a lot of work.
Moratorium.
Yeah, and lifting a moratorium, which is one of the most liberal states out there to not wanting nuclear. So there's a lot happening out there. Unfortunately, Minnesota's starting to get there, and we'd like to see more action going forward. So we have all the above choices to meet this carbon-free standard.
So,
I think
so kind of begs the, I'm sorry, but kind of begs the question though then, and I think this is probably on a lot of people's minds. So if the moratorium's lifted and let's say it's lifted and we were able to make that change in Minnesota, and Minnesota lawmakers would make that change, what's the feasibility for timeline for a nuclear plant to be built now? And I know that's kind of a loaded question.
We may have different opinions on that too.
We have not checked our answers.
But I think this is that value of having this discussion and having different experts in here. We do know about a Vogel in Georgia, the time overrun, the cost overrun. We have advances in technology. What's you guys' thoughts?
How about I do this? Mike, you want to tell them how long you think it takes, and then I'll tell them why it doesn't matter?
I would actually start. I'm going to put my Great River Energy hat on first and say it starts with a utility, right? I mean, utilities plan in decades, not in like 1 year, 2 years. And so, in order for them to start thinking about this, if the moratorium got lifted tomorrow, yes, will they start looking at it? Yeah, I think they'll start looking at it, but to get the projects lined up, it could take a while, right? Now, that's one question, right? Even if the technology was ready today. Now, is the technology ready? Yes. You could go out and some will say Vogel 3 and 4 took, 15 years and $30 billion to build two reactors,
too much.
Right? It's way too much. Some say, well, you don't want to do that again. And some say, why not? You learned all the lessons. Let's go build it again and get that cost down, right? There's a thing called first of a kind and then what we call nth of a kind, right? Usually takes about 4, 5, 6 plants to get to that where you've reached that nth of a kind, where you've learned from that curve, right? So every new reactor, every new technology is going to see that, right? Whether it's high temperature gas or what I'm doing, putting reactors a mile underground, right? So to get to your real question, and then Philip can answer the question then, is when do I think, if somebody could, if that moratorium was overturned, a utility was ready to go, how long would it take? I think you're looking right now at about 20, at the earliest for a commercial reactor, probably 2030, and that's if everything goes right. Okay, more realistically, probably 2031, 2032, if you ask me right now. That's about the soonest you can get one on there. That's talking an advanced reactor that's a little further along with development, deployment, licensing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I mean, there's a lot going on in the administration with the executive orders on nuclear, a lot of programs like the DOE pilot program, test reactor program. The NRC is revising some regulations, which we never to get back to that, so maybe we can do that later. There's a lot going on to promote nuclear, to say fast track nuclear. But I think you're probably in that early 2030s, my best bet.
Yeah, I think that's the life cycle. There's this whole build, right? We're building, if you're talking about building a reactor, building a plant, that's one thing. But really what we're talking about changing the fundamental infrastructure of our grid and how we create power. And that requires planning and policy and agreement between people who have a history of not agreeing with one another and all these sorts of things. So when you have something that's off the table, you cannot do this, and then you suddenly say, now it's on the table, the amount of time it takes to put the shovel in the ground and build the machine does not represent the full extent necessarily of how long it's going to take to okay, yep, we lifted the moratorium, come back into the room, let's have a conversation, let my engineers go out and do my resource planning for my utility and run the options between should we just buy more power from Canada or should we build a reactor or should we pay? All together, this thing, I think about 14 years is a reasonable timeline to do that, which is what I've been telling people, which is why we should lift the moratorium now. Because if we want to be in a position where we can realistically say, I think there's a real chance we can build new nuclear and have them online to help us meet our 2040 carbon goals, we want to do it this year. There are folks who say, well, we don't know enough. Let's have a study. Let's push it 2 years. Then maybe we'll do this. And to me, I'm like, are you just trying to make sure that by the time it comes online, it won't be viable to meet our goals? So I find that frustrating. The other thing I'll add is you've ever heard the expression, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. What's the next best time to build a tree? Now. So 2040 isn't a magical date by which if we don't hit carbon free, something bad happens or good happens. And it's not a date after which we can go keep doing whatever we were doing before that. We have to stay carbon free after 2040. So if the goal is we want to be carbon free by 2040 and we don't make it until 2041, I feel like that's still a win on the effort of what we're trying to accomplish. So, and also you look at this other opportunity of some of these resources that we're relying on, the wind and the solar and some of these other things, they've been up for 10 years. Look at what's their expected lifespan. They're going to be retiring at some point. 30 years is reasonable expectation of what a wind turbine's going to live for. And there are wind turbines that are about 15 years old. So wouldn't it be nice to have something ready to replace them? Or if those wind turbines don't need to be replaced until 2050, we have something to replace them with. So longer way of me sneaking in more information into your question.
So, no, and so I think that helps, but it helps us put that into perspective that we need to look at I'll use the golf metaphor here. We're going to play the long game, and maybe what we've been kind of conditioned into, or maybe even trapped into, is playing the short game. So we're trying to figure out the course, and the course is not 18 holes. It's 15 years or 14 years now to 2040, and as you're sharing with us, Philip, that we need to be looking at this. The vision should be the long game and where we go and what we do, not just to get to 2040, but how do we operate into the future.
Yeah, and beyond the 2040, let's say you don't care about 2040. Let's say you don't care about carbon-free 2040. There are some people who don't. If there's going to be a lot of money being spent on building new power generation to meet demand, there are, the industry workers that receive the most compensation, the highest paid wages, the most benefits, the most stable employment are nuclear workers. Nuclear plants employ, hundreds to thousands of people indefinitely. Like, you build a plant, there will be people working there for 100 years. What an anchor to a community. What a tax-paying, employing, union-benefited, group of folks. And you can't offshore those jobs. I don't care what we pass, right? So this is also about community building. This is about making sure that if we are going to be spending our money, our ratepayer money, our Minnesota taxpayer dollars, our federal taxpayer dollars to build these things, let's invest that money in our community, not to necessarily maybe some other technology where the major expense is buying something that someone else is making somewhere else.
That's a great point, and it brings us into, bringing this back to, so how does that affect, all of us here, and how does that affect us in that local reach Mr. Thompson addressed for us to start the evening, and so we have to look at, what can that impact with nuclear be to the consumer? I always look at it as that's the fourth largest bill, third or fourth that everybody pays every month. The mortgage, health insurance, groceries, and then the electric bill. And I hate to say it, but I think that's probably the truth. So we want to look at, this a little bit from that consumer perspective, and we have to ask that question. We're talking on a bigger scale or bigger space, but ask that question: can nuclear compete in the energy marketplace? Mike, you had mentioned earlier, the efficiency of these plants running at 92% is not unheard of in the nuclear industry. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's a capacity factor, not an efficiency. But for Philip, because he's a numbers and units guy. But for me, it comes down to can it compete? Yes. It comes down to reliability, really. I mean, these are base load plants.
Yep.
And I'm no expert in the grid per se. Just I pick it up, in a little bit of my day job. But I mean, if we can value base load energy like we should for reliability, I think that's an important thing from a grid, like a MISO, right, which is our regional transmission organization out there. I think absolutely. I think markets need to change a little bit in that regard. Long term, do I think it? Yes, actually. I mentioned earlier, the first of a kind is going to be a little bit more expensive, and it has to come down. You have to build them in order to bring that down. And I think if we can get to that point, yes. Leveling the playing field right now. I mean, production tax credits on wind and solar are going away, and so I'm already seeing and hearing about wind prices, going up drastically right now because of inflation, because of those production tax credits. So yes, it is starting to level the playing field. I think it can be competitive. It's going to take a little while, though.
Yeah, Dirk, does the moratorium does that create a competitive disadvantage for Minnesota consumers? I look at this, without nuclear, that you're taking another tool, or you're not allowing another tool in the toolbox with the moratorium. Your thoughts?
I think the moratorium, because of its impact on the discussion we're having more broadly, its impact on nuclear as an industry, I think absolutely. We've mentioned Vogtle a couple of times up here. I'll just say explicitly, because I don't know if we have, but most of you may be familiar with this, but Vogtle has been in the news quite a bit. That's the last two nuclear plants built in the country. They were built in Georgia. These are big traditional type nuclear plants. They were advanced for sure compared to
designed with computers this time.
Designed by computers, very, very fancy. I'm going to get one myself soon. Yeah. And, $30 billion for two plants, at least I think twice over budget. Anybody heard of a little company called Westinghouse? They were the contractors for this, bankrupt Westinghouse in the process. So, the affordability aspects of nuclear are definitely a challenge in the industry. But again, I want to put that in the context of, how can we say we need nuclear if it has these affordability? You got to put it in the context of, we have problems that we need to solve that are going to take a lot of money to solve, whether we like it or not. And those problems, studies have been run to show if you're going to make progress at getting to a carbon constrained environment, then how do you do that in a way that's as cost effective as possible? And pretty consistently, those studies show nuclear just has to be part of that mix, because there aren't really other options. I mean, I have kind of talked about this concern with let's just build wind and solar. I do want to say explicitly, wind and solar are great energy resources. So the idea is not that we shouldn't build more wind and solar. We built more, 87% of all generation put online last year was solar energy, 87%. Of course, 58% of all statistics are just made up on the spot.
I thought it was 56.
Oh, they might be 50. You're in the statistics. So But, I mean, there's a lot of solar going in. There have been changes in the tax structure, so that'll have an impact. But there's gonna be a lot more wind and solar, and that's good. It's a relatively quick to build, relatively low cost, but you can't build enough of it to make sure, you physically can't do it, to make sure that it's there for the week-long cold snap in Minnesota when you only have 8 hours of daylight in a day. And if you tried to, the cost would go exponentially higher.
Correct.
You'd have to install way more batteries than a reasonable society can afford. And the cost of nuclear becomes the more competitive option. That's, so while you hear these things about nuclear is expensive, it's again, what's the alternative? And as I think we've talked, the more of it you build, eventually we'll get good at it, right? I mean, you may be already good at it.
Well, go back to China. I mean, they're putting on about a plant every 2 months, it feels like. I mean, a couple a year anyway, and they've got the cost, the dollar per kW down to where it's the best source out there right now for them. Yep. They stopped building coal even, is what I've heard recently, because that was their primary building.
Stop building coal in China.
Yeah.
They're still building plenty of coal in other countries.
And in research, for this evening, one of the things that kept coming up over and over to me was that when you look at countries that have strong nuclear power operations, their consumers experience more stable and a relatively lower cost for energy. And if we see this being duplicated and it being sustainable in other places, should we not investigate and certainly see if that could be an option for us, especially bring this back to the consumer. We want. We know through studies, we know through asking our consumers here in the state of Minnesota. The number one concern they have is reliability. Number one. But slightly right behind it is price. So they want affordability, but most importantly, they want reliability. They want the power to always be there when they need it. When we look at some of the changes that we're seeing in the landscape as far as economic development and opportunities in the state of Minnesota, so you look at data centers are in the news a lot, crypto mining, earthen mining. We're talking more and more about digging in the ground for precious metals, for different things, and large-scale manufacturing. We have technology, robotics, big plants building big things and doing these things now here in our state and in our country. Does that create a greater opportunity for nuclear and with the ability to size that as you've mentioned before? We can build these plants to different sizes to need. Your thoughts on that? Phil?
Yes, I think it does. And there's a couple of reasons to kind of pull in, summarize what we're talking about in terms of costs. There is a difference between price and cost and value. This is something that you hear about in economics, is that the price that you have to pay to get this thing doesn't mean that's what the cost that the consumer, the ratepayer, has to pay. There's a lot of other things that go in there.
Certainly.
Right? Maybe you have to buy batteries, maybe you have to buy reliability, maybe you have to buy power from someone else when they don't want to sell it and it's very expensive. And then the value that you receive is that inherent reliability or the carbon-free attributes that you want. So there's that kind of picture that price isn't always necessarily the right thing. And And then secondly, when we talk about these countries, I think alluding to maybe like France or Canada, who a province of Ontario, which has gone basically 80% nuclear power for all of their electricity. And they have some of the most reliable power at the lowest cost with the happiest customers, right? I love what you do, Derek, but good ratepayers just want it to work, and they want it to be cheap, and they want good, smart people to worry about that, and they don't want to worry about it, right? And so I think looking, and that is, electrical grid it's infrastructure, right? We don't try and break up and say, what does it cost per penny per trip to build the bridge that goes over the river? Some people do. Some people have to do that. But in the end, we make a decision as a community. It's worth investing money now because we have to spend money. So let's spend money to build the good thing that lasts a long time, anticipating the needs of the future. And that's really, I think, what nuclear power plants bring, is that these are plants that have demonstrated life of 80 years, could probably go longer. They are expensive to build, cheap to run and operate. So that is the sort of thing that, as if you're looking to how do we secure our future, how do we make sure that moving forward we're doing the right thing, investing in an infrastructure of reliable, clean power to move forward is good for the country, it's good for our children, it's good for future ratepayers. And that also, again, isn't into that price calculation. That's the part of the value between the cost price value that I was talking about.
So I kind of want to wrap this section with consumers, and one of the things that consumers look at when we talk about generation resources out there is that at some point in time, and you kind of alluded to this too, Philip and Mike, about at some point in time, these sites reach an end of life, and decommissioning has to take place, and we have to deal with the solar field that no longer serves its purpose anymore, or the wind turbines, or the coal plant. Do we have a good understanding about what that end of life may look like in the nuclear sense?
You've
got a great idea.
Yeah,
of what
absolutely,
that looks like.
and that's what I did at the La Crosse boiling water reactor. It's well understood. Clean up, decommissioning, putting the spent fuel into dry cask storage, which is well understood and shielded. It gives out virtually no dose. Obviously, we don't have a national repository. That's a political thing. Technology is there to do it, but the politics aren't there yet. But and then you look at, but you said it well, Greg. I've also been on the coal plant side, and cleaning up ash ponds and cleaning up coal piles and tearing down a facility and doing all the well monitoring. All that's the same, really, no matter what generation source. Derek said it really well earlier. So it is absolutely well understood. There's been, I don't know, a dozen or more probably. You talked about Elk River earlier. It's been completely cleaned up, free release. There's no residual. And like I said, it's an industry in and of itself. I've gone to decommissioning conferences, just that's all we talk about, right? So yeah, it's very well understood, and it's really no different than any other.
Oh, it's different in one important way, I think. It's the only industry that's already paid for it.
Yeah, no,
Right?
good point.
So nuclear energy, when you build a nuclear power plant and you get a license from the NRC, you have to figure out when you're planning on shutting it down, how much it's going to cost to shut it down, how much it's going to cost to remediate it, how much it's going to cost to clean the land back to the way it came from. And then you have to put enough money in a trust so that over that period of time, the interest will get you to the point you have enough money. You have to pay for your full decommissioning of your plant when you turn it on. No one else does that.
And I can tell you right now, I just broke ground and I'm starting to build a plant in Kansas right now, a nuclear power plant for deep fission, and I'm already starting to line up that decommissioning fund, yep. Whereas I don't see that in any other.
Yeah, I don't see that.
And I really think that's what you've just shared is important for the public to be able to grasp there. Because we continually hear about those concerns about some of the other resources that I mentioned. And so what happens to these things? What happens to that windmill or what happens to those precious metals that are within those solar panels that cover this ground out there too? And so, that's important for us and certainly important for the consumers and the public. And that kind of brings us into, how do we engage and further engage the public in this, in this process? It isn't, all these things happen not so much because of an elected official taking a proverbial vote, but we all understand that the process, and some of us more than others, the political process and the governmental process of this. But we want to help the public and our organization, the Rosenmeier Center. We do this to help educate the public on the process, as well as the end result there too. And so, when we look at this, I look to you, Derek. Share with us, what's the Minnesota Nuclear Energy Alliance, and who are its members, and and what is the work that they're doing?
Well, thank you to Greg and the Rosenmeier Center board. I think this is clearly a great example of kind of engaging the public, and we'll engage in some questions in a few minutes.
Certainly.
But I did mention in passing the Nuclear Alliance. We started that about exactly a year ago, for the sole purpose of trying to work at the legislature to lift the moratorium. That's the only purpose that it has. And of course, helping to get the word out and talk to folks in the public about nuclear is a big part of trying to do that. It's 68, I think, organizations right now are members of that alliance, so it's growing very quickly. It's very broad based. It includes a lot of union membership, because these are the best paying jobs. I can't even think of a parallel to, really. And a lot of environmental groups that recognize the kind of challenges that I've kind of dwelt on tonight so a lot of them are members of the coalition. Utilities are members of the coalition. In the last 6 months in particular, we've had a lot of interest from counties, and really appreciate that. Of course, one of your many roles as county commissioner at Morrison County. Morrison County and 24 other counties in the last 6 months have passed resolutions saying, they support this effort because they recognize the need to address these challenges. So that's a little bit about who they are and what they do. Now, Generation Atomic, of course, a very key member of the coalition, but in general,
this is our bread and butter. This is what we do.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So Generation Atomic, this is a nonprofit, volunteer-based advocacy group. We work nationally and internationally, and we're lucky enough to be centered here in the great state of Minnesota. But where we spend our efforts and our work is to try and identify, how do we change minds? How do we move people? We think we have an awesome solution for everyone. It's in our mission to promote advocates to believe in a future powered by atomic energy. And in doing that, spend a lot of time talking to people and learning about what questions people have and how to answer them. But I think one of the big revelations that's important to note is, in terms of what people can do, is to recognize that saying something and asking the questions and engaging with your neighbor is really important. So pull stats into it. The recent Pew poll, December 2025, released. Currently, there is a 59% approval rating of Americans to build new nuclear. That is 51% from the Ds and 67% or something like this from the Rs. So in a world where we have incredible divisions between us, the use of nuclear power is the smallest of all the gaps between coal, wind, solar. When nuclear is the one that we all agree on, over 50% with the smallest gap. The people who strongly disagree with new nuclear are less than 6% of Americans. So what we hear is that there are a lot of people, in my experience, think that everyone is scared of nuclear or thinks that everyone thinks nuclear is bad, but they don't say anything. And so this 6%, oftentimes can take the conversation away from people who may feel differently. And so I would encourage people to learn more, talk more, tell your friends. We had a campaign about being nuclear curious, telling people, come out. Like if you believe that nuclear, maybe you've changed your mind, you think, I think we should look into this a little bit more. Say it, have the conversation. And I think what you'll find is that a lot of people around there will be willing to have that. And when that happens, then we talk to our elected officials, then we talk to our legislators, and then they know that they have the support from their communities to do what the community needs. And I think that that's an important way to make these changes.
So it begs me to ask the question, Phil and Mike and Derek, who is opposing nuclear and why? What do you think the reason, what do you think that reason why is? Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, a lot of thoughts actually. Because I'm dealing with it a little bit in the site I've got in Kansas right now for deep fission. Generally good support across the community. I was just out there 2 weeks ago doing community engagement. I met with all the civic groups, all the leadership, county commissioners, everybody. Everybody's on for it. They want to hear more information. What I'm hearing and seeing out there is those, and apologize, is the older generation that was around the China syndrome and that sort of thing where they just never gave it up. They're not willing to move forward and think through what the country needs in terms of reliability and price of electricity and such. I do think there is a small, maybe it's a small population, but I see it in some of the literature that I'm seeing talking to people where I have to educate them, is where they just don't understand the difference between a nuclear bomb and a nuclear generation plant for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And you have to explain to them the difference, of what we do. Commercial industry uses, 5% enriched uranium. A nuclear bomb is what, 90-some% enriched or something like that. So, I mean, it's just totally, completely different. We're not even on the scale of something like that. And we're, there's all these processes and everything else. You just have to keep explaining and talking to people about that. But that's, to me, what I'm seeing and hearing right now. There's probably more, you deal with it more than I do.
What I see is I see, and the data that I see and my work in the field backs up, is that folks, there is a zeitgeist of concern about nuclear. Just nuclear sounds bad, radiation sounds bad, people don't realize, all radiation is going to kill me, anything nuclear is probably done by someone who I can't trust, right? The people who aren't fair dealers in facts. And what I find is that the more people learn about it, they come on board. I know very few people. I can count on two hands, two hands. I guess somewhere around there. But we got probably less than 10 people. The hundreds, thousands of people I talk about who, the more they learned about nuclear, became more scared. It's always the other way around.
There's some well-known environmentalists that have looked and done their homework, and they have changed their minds, right, on nuclear. Yeah. So yeah.
It's I ran across this in an email I received, and this is probably something you guys are also, all three of you probably have seen this too, where last Friday the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved its first license for nuclear fuel facilities in over half a century here in the United States, and a company called X Energy. And so they're looking at building, I guess I would say, the most robust nuclear fuel on Earth. And I'm gonna use that as the backdrop here to ask maybe one of our final questions before because we've got the greatest and best looking crowd we've had at a forum here.
And it's hard to guess what people want to know. It's easier just to ask you what you want to know.
And so I have to ask, so what is the U.S. supply of the necessary elements? Uranium, plutonium, other things that I don't know. I'm not in. I don't get to swim in you guys the same pond. And where is, if it isn't in the United States, where in the world are these? And are they traded like oil? Oil is kind of like the world currency. I always say it's the world currency, not the dollar. And would we look at those elements to be traded or marketed in much the same way as oil? What do you guys think? Where are they? Do we have them if we want to expand the nuclear industry in the U.S.?
Okay. Go ahead.
I'll try and say this. It's a great question. Yeah. It is challenging of you to make it the last one. So I think what's important to know is that fundamentally here we're talking about kind of the limiting factor is uranium. Everything else is kind of bog standard. Uranium is not that unusual. It's not that rare in terms of total elements that are in the world. And it's concentrated more in some places than others. However, it is much less diversely concentrated than, say, oil and gas. I mean, oil, you dig, it's there, or it's not there, right? Maybe you got a gusher, maybe it's got, but there are places that don't have oil. It doesn't matter how deep you dig.
Yep.
Uranium is everywhere. It's in the ground, it's in the granite. Every piece of granite in northern Minnesota is 6 parts per million uranium. So uranium exists everywhere. We currently mine it from the most economically recoverable places, as we do everything that we recover that's from a material perspective. So is uranium available to anyone? Yes. Is uranium available to everyone at the same cost? If we decide to have an international market. And we do have an international market in some ways, but because there are fewer people buying and there are some reasonable restrictions in place because of other use that uranium can have in the world, it's not as freely commodity traded like oil. It's different from I think the last part of your question, and then I will stop and let these fine gentlemen put their points in, is there seemed to be hinted in your question, if I remember correctly, some concern about it. Could this be geopolitically destabilizing in the same way that oil or gas or someone cuts off the pipe and there's a war kind of stuff? Mm-hmm. Much less so, for a couple of reasons. One, the energy, as we started this conversation, the energy density of uranium is so high, right? One fuel pellet is worth a ton of coal. I can buy and store, in times of peace, 10 years of fuel and stick it in the back of my plant. And it'll be there, and it'll work when I need it. So that's one thing you can do if you want to guard against this sort of stuff. Currently, for comparison, like the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve I think has like 20 days of oil supply for, at current rates of U.S. consumption. You could just go buy 20 years of uranium, and then you'd have it.
And I'll say utilities with the cutoff, because there were a lot of enriched uranium came from Russia for many years until recently, right? That was banned here. There's some waivers out to 2028 right now, but most utilities are buying fuel at least 5 to 8 years right now ahead of time. So they have 5 to 8 years in the pipeline coming or at their plant. But when you ask where is this, the U.S. has some reserves. The U.S. used to produce quite a bit of uranium. Then then what they did is the Cold War and all the uranium stockpiles came down. When I say the nuclear bombs, they were actually, it was called, what was it called? Bombs.
Megatons to megawatts.
Thank you, megawatt. So they basically took a lot of the nuclear bombs that they de-enriched it essentially, because it was highly enriched to like a 5% enrichment uranium-235. They brought it down and then they put it out in the market. It flooded the market and made it a lot cheaper. And so a lot of uranium mines shut down. So Wyoming, Utah, those are kind of those concentrations of where you would get it in the U.S. Those mines are starting back up now with this ban on Russian fuel. Canada, Australia are some of the bigger places that we get our raw uranium. Something people just maybe quickly understand is you got raw uranium, right, that you mine. You have to convert it. You have to enrich it then, and so there's a process that goes through, like a 3-step process, and then you actually fabricate it into fuel. And then there's different fuel types. You talked about the X-Energy uses a triso fuel. It's a little ball that is what we call accident-tolerant fuel. It can go to like 1,000 degrees or more. I don't remember. It's basically it's not supposed to melt down, right? And even the current reactor fleet is starting to move toward accident-tolerant fuel, where you're just much more susceptible to any kind of hiccup or anything like that. So, and then the last question you had, he said, I agree with Philip. It's not going to be traded like oil. But there are uranium commodity stocks out there. You can invest in Cameco as a uranium mining company. You can invest in Urenco. I don't know what their parent company is, but they enrich uranium. So there's definitely GE, Vernova. They make fuel for boiling water reactors, along with nuclear reactors and turbines and other things, gas turbines and other things. So there's ways to invest in uranium in a way if you really wanted to get into that kind of thing.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I wanted to make sure I got that opportunity to ask that question in. There's a lot of other questions that I brought along with, and I'm not going to commoditize this. I want the opportunity for all the people, and I know there's a number of people here that traveled good miles to come and be with us, and this is a part of our forums. And so we have Mr. Eric Klang here. If you raise your hand, like to ask a question of the panel up here, Eric will bring the mic up. Here we go. Let's go.
All current reactors use fission as the technology. Do you have any thoughts on the future of fusion?
I know two people on this stage do.
I'll share mine first. There's definitely a distinction between fission and fusion, right? We're trying to break it apart versus, fusion's a little bit different and a little bit harder to achieve. I mean, essentially you're basically trying to recreate the sun on Earth, right? And at such immense temperatures, no material can actually hold it, right? There's a joke in the fission industry that fusion's always 50 years away. And it was 50 years away about 50 years ago, and it's still 50 years away. Now, there's been a lot of advancements, don't get me wrong, but they're still only able to hold it into suspension for about 100 seconds or so, and that's a long ways from the amount of power they got to put into that just to create it. So I'm not a fusion expert, and so I still think it's about 50 years away, in my opinion.
So I have to disagree, because I heard the expression is it was always 30 years away.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I do want to add, we do get a lot of power from fusion, right? We just do it differently. The sun is powered by fusion, and we can collect that through solar. So.
Yeah, you got it. It's on.
Just a quick comment. Listening to all this tonight, shouldn't forget that we can help. When you're trying to increase the power you're going to produce those, we still need to work on decreasing demand.
Decreasing demand? Is that the question?
Yeah.
A lot of things better insulated homes, more efficient. And that's one of the things I think we have forgotten about is how efficient this work from home shift in our society can be. For those people who don't have to travel on a daily basis, don't have to have more heated and air conditioned workspace at home and at work. It's a huge thing for our society to look at.
Absolutely. So that's kind of my background as well, right? Is identifying like what are the pathways to what is the role of efficiency and reduced use in terms of the pathway, for me anyway, to zero carbon globally. A couple things. One, you cannot reduce to zero, right? The challenge when you look at the long-term risks of if you're looking at climate change, the climate change numbers are really driven by not the 1 billion people that have plenty of access to energy. It's driven by the 7 billion people who don't have access to enough energy. So the math just says, even if every American never drove a car again, it wouldn't change a lick of the long-term projection of what, for in terms of climate change risk, looks like, if that's the concern. Secondly, the current atmosphere we're hearing about right now about energy growth, demand growth, AI data centers, doesn't sit well with a lot of people because they're like, well, maybe we just like more insulation. Let's do this, reduce use. But even in that scenario we were looking at previously, it was all about electrify everything. So we were anticipating growth of demand 6 years ago when we were expecting, EVs coming online, heat pumps coming online, moving from all these things like this. So regardless of whether you're trying to reduce your total consumption or not, the demand will probably increase because because there's more people who don't have enough energy want more energy. And well, I'll kind of stop there, but I think it's a very good question.
Good point.
Here we go.
I'm a fan of nuclear, and that's one of the reasons I came here, to see if I could get some encouragement, and you did that, so thank you for doing that. The two words that I have not heard in terms of slowing the pace of change, the two words I have not heard any discussion about are litigation and regulation. Can you comment on that?
What do you mean by litigation? Just can you clarify on that? What do you mean by litigation? I mean, are you in nuclear and litigation?
Anytime somebody wants to do something, there's somebody that disagrees with that, they'll go to court. And that's I won't give examples.
Yeah. Okay. In nuclear and okay. Now I'm with you.
Regulation, 3 Mile Island triggered all kinds of regulation that may or may not have been productive, but they certainly damaged our view of nuclear.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to the regulation part, and we started to touch on it a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the industry, but I think the nuclear is one of the heaviest regulated, industries in the world. Have we taken it to a point where it's so difficult we can't even get anything built? Yes. By evidence, we built 2 in the last 30 years. And even the ones that are running, I mean, what it takes to get work done in there is because of the extra controls. So yes, and again, I've been in the industry since I was 19 years old. I've been operating nuclear power plants in the Navy. And I can tell you that I believe that there's a way to streamline the regulation without removing the safety requirements. I'm a fan of that. I know the administration is working toward that right now, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is set to release a whole slew of updated regulations here. I've heard March. I met with them in January. I heard in March they're issuing a whole bunch, some in draft, some in final, for issuance. And I'm hopeful. Proof is in the pudding once I see them, to see if it will actually streamline things. I think what's important is to maintain the safety of the reactors, right? One thing we tell ourselves in the industry, it's not the regulator's job for safety, it's the designer, it's the operator, so it's my job as a COO of a company to make sure that these reactors are safe. It's everybody's responsibility, so whether there's regulation or not, I'm not going to build a reactor that's not safe, right? So well, there's a lot of work going toward that to streamline things again, and not, some people will say, the detractors will say, well, no, you're making it less safe. No, we're not. We're just making it easier to build them, but and still be able to get work done by keeping them safe. The litigation side, I'm not really sure.
Mike, I'd like to comment on that if I could, and I'm not claiming to be in these guys' wheelhouse, but I want to tell you from our perspective from the Rosenmeier Center, and all of us at the center are extremely happy that all of you are here. But this is kind of that baseline for us, is to be able to engage in conversation and share facts and opinions, and have the ability to have discussion on topics and find areas where we can agree on things and find areas where we can respectfully disagree. To respectfully disagree on things. And we believe, our organization believes, that there is extreme value to the public and to community by being able to get together at forums like this to learn from each other and share with each other our thoughts. And we don't look at litigation or I will sue you or I will take you to court because I don't like what you say, I don't agree with what you say. I take that responsibility as a board member and as a member of society very seriously. And I thank you for your question and for being here. Eric.
So my question is, what are some of the biggest challenges facing nuclear energy in Minnesota, and how does public engagement and education support them?
Yeah, can you repeat that?
I said, what are some of the biggest challenges to expanding nuclear energy in Minnesota, and how does public engagement and education support this move?
Yeah, I think to me, by far the biggest, clearest answer to that is the moratorium on new nuclear energy. I mean, you're specifically, I think in your question, saying expanded, new, more. What we have for nuclear energy in the state today isn't at risk from the legislature, but there is a law that you cannot build more. And there is part of what we run into when we visit with legislators about this is this idea where some of them will say, well, bring us what you want to build, and then we'll tell you whether you can build that or not. And if it's a good enough project, the idea is, that they'll let the building go ahead. But I think it was Philip did a nice job, maybe you both did to some degree, of more on, that's not really, utilities don't spend $1 million to define a project and then bring it to a legislator to say, may I build this project? They proceed from the body of law that's before them to decide if it makes sense to spend all of these resources to figure out whether they can build a project. So I think it's very, I think the moratorium is critical. And then, in the other half of the question, I think this public engagement, I think getting folks in the state of Minnesota more information about why this is an important topic you know, we're certainly optimistic that'll be something that'll help in that effort.
Yeah, thanks for being here. My name is Matt Killian. I'm the president of the Grand Lakes Chamber, and this is really important for the entire business community, not only in our area, obviously, but around the state. Affordable, reliable energy is top of mind for a lot of businesses. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is to push a little bit more on the safety issue that really wasn't covered in depth. And I think about the different generations. If you were sort of worldly aware in the 1970s, or if you remember 3 Mile Island, when I grew up in the 1980s, I have these horrific images of Chernobyl, and then you had the Fukushima somewhere in the 2010s. I can't remember exactly what, but if there's pushback or hesitancy around these things, it's probably around those safety issues, because these are the images that are indelibly left in our brains. And I'm just wondering, like in the area, excuse me, like cyber attacks and natural disasters, terrorism, and all these things, as well as just the general technology and how you build these plants differently now. How would you talk about safety or convince the public that more nuclear plants of any type are safer or as safe as what we have now? Thanks.
Go ahead, Richard.
Super great question. Important question. It's important to recognize, I think, that there is an existing fear about things that are nuclear. And in some ways it's amorphous. Sometimes in my work, you know, my parents hid under the desks in grade school, so the Soviets, they would save them from the Soviet bombs. And my parents lived their entire lives afraid of all things nuclear because the Soviets were going to bomb them. You know, maybe some people in this room grew up, you know, hiding in their classrooms from active shooters, right? I mean, I guess the difference, you know, in the same way, these are real risks, but they don't happen very often. In the case of the Soviets, they never bombed us. But that living in fear really does just kind of change the way the brain works and the amygdala, and you can kind of get into the neuroscience of it. And so what we find is that these events like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima become place markers around which we wrap all these other fears. I don't think that 3 Mile Island in itself, if you look at the data of the event that actually occurred, is the reason that people are scared of stuff. It's because 3 Mile Island happened during the Cold War, 1 week after a movie called The China Syndrome came out, which is a top blockbuster of the week that told the story of a nuclear plant that went rogue and melted down, and the government lied to everyone. And when 3 Mile Island happened, everyone was afraid that there was going to be a bunch of release. Everyone was afraid that the government was lying to them. But there wasn't a significant release, and the government wasn't lying to them. So we have things like that where people take a lot of these things and wrap them around them. I think there are lessons that were learned from from each one of these events. Every time we have an accident, and by God, we've had like a total of 4. The fact that people here can name all of them, you know, if I asked you how many airplanes crashed last year, if I asked you how many oil spills occurred in the last week, if I asked you how many natural gas pipelines blew up in neighborhoods, right? Of course, you may have heard they've happened. They don't have names to you. You don't use capital letters, 3-letter acronyms to describe them. And from each one of these events, we learned really important lessons. From 3 Mile Island, we learned about, you know, the value of sharing information between nuclear plants, about doing proactive maintenance instead of waiting for things to break. As a result of 3 Mile Island, our plants they went from being 60% capacity factors to being 90% capacity factors. Went from a situation where companies who were running nuclear power plants didn't share any information because they thought it was a competitive disadvantage, to openly and willingly sharing everything they learned about, hey, I had this problem with this thing, you should do this kind of stuff. We got way better because of 3 Mile Island. And there are similar stories with Chernobyl and Fukushima of lessons that we learned. And I think it's important to recognize that all these technologies that we use as we develop stuff, there will be accidents. I know nuclear engineers that say, oh, it'll never happen again. It will. There's going to be another nuclear accident. I don't know when it's going to be. I hope it'll be small. I hope no one gets hurt. But I'm a fool to say that there will never be one. But I put that in comparison to the accidents that we accept happening every day because they're so frequent. Pause there.
That's my drop.
Hi, can I ask multiple questions? They're all short, I think.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the answers that you have to worry about.
What is a moratorium? I am lost on that.
Yeah, so
Derek.
there's a law in the state of Minnesota, it's illegal to build new nuclear plants. That moratorium. Sorry about that.
More than okay. And then could you point me in the direction of any generally good books on the topic of nuclear power or nuclear power plants? I know that's a broad question, but any help would be amazing.
I would start with, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to tell you where you should go to find the list of all the books to read. There's a website that's created by one of our board members at Generation Atomic. It's called whatisnuclear.com. Go to whatisnuclear.com and you will find a short, concise list of good nuclear books that says if you're interested in the policy, read this one. If you're interested in the technology, read this one. If you're interested in thorium molten salt reactors, read this one. And so that would be where I would send you.
How do you spell nuclear? Because I've seen it spelled 2 different ways.
In the power sense, it's only spelled in one way, just Nuclear.
Are you a student here?
Yes.
Thank you for being here as a student.
In the Minneapolis paper this morning, there was an article on small portable nuclear reactors. Portable nuclear reactors. Fact or fiction? On wind turbines, if you have 40 acres in North Dakota and you're hitched up to Automobile Power Company, on January 15th, you will have deposited in your bank account a check for $8,500. Now, if you have 10 sections in North Dakota and you're hitched up to Automobile Power Company, you will have so much money you can buy an island somewhere. But anyway, don't you think it would be better to take all of these different sources of power and put them together so they all are connected? Nuclear power is a good source. Wind turbines are good. Coal-fired is good, but you clean it up and it all works out. If you go to Becker, Minnesota and drive downtown, you're going past a coal-fired plant. If you go to Monticello, you're going to a nuclear plant. If you look over to the right on the way downtown, you have solar power deals, wind turbines. Where's that wind turbine at in Becker? It's really small, but it is along on the right, on the left-hand side of the road as you go past the last stoplight to Monticello. So all these, it's a diversified portfolio that you're looking for, I think. You know. Anyway, that's it.
No, I think that's a good summary of some of the main points I've been trying to talk about, frankly. And they are all interconnected. I didn't really talk about that a lot, but you know, your point about having them all available. I mean, the way the grid works, if you build them most anywhere in the country, they are essentially all interacting with each other at the speed of light.
Let me just say one thing to that too. You talk about putting them together. A lot of the traditional nuclear plants now that are operating are base load. And a lot of the advanced reactors, not all of them, are starting to look at load following. So they will be able to go up and down, turn power up when with wind and solar. So they're trying to be more flexible with some of the designs, which comes really inherently into the design itself, the fuel and other things.
All right, get one back here.
How can the industry manage the high costs and potential for project delays in building new innovative nuclear plants?
Answer quick.
Oh, we got to get done.
Industry guy who's building a new nuclear power plant. Your question.
It just, you said earlier, planning. It just comes down to good planning. I mean, if you rush your design and trying to build while you're designing, you're going to run into problems. That was one of the main problems at Vogtle, is they weren't done with the design and they had to dig things back up in order to finish the design, and then they put it back in. And so it all comes down to just good planning through the life cycle, the life cycle that Philip talked about.
It also helped explain one of the differences we had about how long could you, quick as you could, build a nuclear power plant, 5 years. And I was saying maybe it's a little longer than that. It's like, if you want to do it the cheapest, most effective, avoid overruns, avoid stuff, that takes more time. So these are.
John, you got the last question.
Oh, I do, okay. John Lupke, Crow Wing County Commissioner, I also sit on the Crow Wing Power Board. And we're talking about building nuclear, not building nuclear, the fear of it. What happens if we don't? What happens if we don't in 10 years, 15 years? When are the lights going to go out? You know, in Minnesota right now, do we produce enough power in Minnesota right now to power Minnesota without bringing it in from either Canada or Dakotas or from where else? Do we produce enough now in Minnesota just to keep our lights on? And so what happens if we don't do something as nuclear? I'm a proponent for nuclear, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's, again, probably a more concise way of phrasing what I've been trying to emphasize. That it's really, assuming you're going to continue to try to reduce carbon, which regardless of the exact details of the policy is probably the world we're going to live in. You really have to have nuclear as part of the mix in order to solve the problem rationally. Or there could be some big breakthrough, you know, but if we want to talk about the real world, it really has to be part of the mix in order to continue to have stable, reliable electricity mix into the future.
All right, we're going to take one more question, but don't fear. You guys are welcome to stay around. These guys
we'll
will
be
stay
around.
around, and you can ask them any question you want. Here we go. Last question.
Hi, where is spent nuclear fuel being stored in regards to the 3 power plants in Minnesota?
Good question.
Great. Good question. The short answer is there are 2 locations. So there's 2 plants that have 3 reactors, 2 plants. There's one Prairie Island, one in Monticello. The spent fuel from Prairie Island is at Prairie Island. Spent fuel from Monticello, almost all of it's at Monticello. We shipped a little bit of it to Illinois 20 years ago.
We want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Please feel free to stay around. Make sure you follow us on Facebook for a new forum that's coming up. So thank you.
We shipped some Monticello You're very welcome. I'm still alive.
How long have you been for you? Since